Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 5th of March 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today is Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century War. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Just looking, I think we do have a technical problem here. I'm not quite sure what that is. So we'll just start this again, I think. So just bear with us for 1 second, please. afternoon. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. It is Monday, the 5th of March, 2018, just after 1, well, actually, 1:15 now. I do apologise for the technical problems and the delay to the start of the programme. Welcome to the programme to Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire.
Good to be with you, Mike.
Well, we better get straight on with it then. So here we go. The beast from the east has a sting in the tail, Patrick. This follows on from what we were saying about the great storm, the great snowstorm that we've been experiencing last week. And apparently Southeast Water, Thames Water, Southern Water, Affinity Water have released a statement saying that following the recent freeze and rapid thaw, water companies across London and the southeast of England are experiencing exceptionally high levels of demand for water due to multiple bursts on networks and an increase in leaks in and on customer properties. So they're asking for customers who have water to use as little as possible while they're currently without water or have low pressure. We are putting as much extra water as we can into our local networks, they said, and fixing leaks and bursts as quickly as possible. We sincerely apologise to all those who are currently without water or experiencing low pressure. So apparently they have been delivering water to hospitals, 20,000 homes without water in the southeast. Some schools are closed, Patrick, because they don't have water in the schools. And so it goes on. So we have this continuing failing infrastructure situation, all caused, as we know from last week, by Vladimir Putin. Yes.
2 days and 4 inches of snow and the whole country shuts down. I think we have a resilience issue.
We absolutely do. So Theresa May clearly thinks that this is a good thing because she wants to build more houses and she wants to keep the borders open and make sure that more and more people come into the country. And this, of course, has been the argument that I've been making on the issue of immigration for quite a number of years now. The fact is we do not have the infrastructure to support it. And that has been demonstrated in the past week. It continues to be demonstrated now because, but she wants to build more homes, Patrick. She wants to build more homes. She said, she was giving a speech this morning, she said, "I still vividly remember the first home I shared with my husband, Philip. It was so romantic." And she said, not only our pictures on the walls and our books on the shelves, but also the security that came from knowing we couldn't be asked to move on at short notice, unless they fell behind with their mortgage, of course, in which case they'd get kicked out straight away. But that's neither here nor there. She's painting this romantic picture of home ownership. She said, where cities surrounded by green belts need more homes, we can increase housing density, make better use of brownfield sites, build upwards rather than outwards. Our new planning rules make it easier to do this. So she is promoting the building of affordable homes, new homes. Let's build the homes, but we're not going to build the infrastructure that goes with it. So we won't have the water pipes, we won't have the railway stations, we won't have the schools, we won't have the hospitals. That's okay, so long as we've got the affordable homes. What she's doing here is pumping up the housing market or keeping the bubble afloat, and that's all she's attempting to achieve with this.
What sort of homes are we talking about? Semi-detached wimpies in brown belt areas in places where people don't actually want to live? Reclaimed land somewhere out in the nether regions after the M25 maybe? Very attractive new communities.
Well, I think it actually goes well beyond that. She wants to make use of greenbelt land, land that developers have been holding on to, that haven't been developing on the land. They've got the land, they've got the planning permission, but they don't feel the economic situation is quite there just yet, so they're not developing on it. She wants to continue to push that. But as I say, what she's actually wanting to do is to keep this housing bubble afloat. They're starting to panic a little bit, particularly in London. The air's coming out of that bubble pretty quickly now.
Yep, and that's the air out of the Tories' political bubble as well.
Absolutely.
Because housing prices have to rise.
Absolutely.
This is the law of the universe. Okay,
let's move on then to Penny Mordaunt, who was giving a speech this morning. This follows on from the Oxfam allegations. So she has announced that the Department for International Development, this was a couple of weeks ago, she announced that the DFID and the Charity Commission would be co-hosting a safeguarding summit, and so they decided they would hold that today, the 5th of March. And this is going to it has brought together UK international development charities, regulatory bodies and independent experts to commit, they say, to drive up safeguarding standards and take bold steps to tackle sexual exploitation and abuse within charities and by staff abroad. So this is what she said. My message to those who have sought to exploit this sector and the human tragedy in which it operates: we will find you, we will bring you to justice, your time is up. Now, I might be able to take those words seriously if the government, if the Department for International Development or Penny Mordaunt were doing anything to bring the politicians that are involved in sexual exploitation and abuse of women and children in this country to justice. I might take it seriously. So we will reiterate once again that this is about something else. This is about the government trying to get its claws into charities and making sure that the charities are doing what government, where they're working together, collaborating on a joint policy agenda. Now, who was at this? Well, Action Aid was there, Age International, Bond, of course, the British Red Cross, Care International, Christian Aid, Coalition of Aid and Development Agencies in Northern Ireland, Comic Relief was there, Concern Worldwide, Conciliation Resources, Gender and Development Network, Hub Cymru Africa, International Rescue Committee, of course, because we've got to have international NGOs at this as well. Mercy Corps, Muslim Aid, Oxfam GB, Plan International, the list goes on. And they are then going to be holding another broader event later in the year. But my question remains, why now? These abuses have been taking place for a long time. There is a policy agenda at work here.
Sure, and it's not just the crisis of the sex scandal with regards to Oxfam and Brendan Cox and so forth. There's a bigger problem, Mike, which is the general public image of charities and NGOs. And so as they see some of their public relations stock tanking, especially with revelations of NGOs that are involved in nefarious activity in Syria, like the White Helmets, for instance. So there is definitely a PR issue with a lot of these charities. They've been under the gun for a long time, Mike, and everybody has seen the graphs of the percentage of which people donate and how much of that actually goes to the needy people on the ground in places like Haiti and so forth after any of these big disasters. And it's a small percentage, something like, 10 cents on the dollar in some cases. Yeah. So, they have a major crisis issue, but these are so important, these NGOs and charities, because the government does launder a lot of its activity in terms of foreign policy and consensus building overseas through charities and NGOs. They need this third sector, Mike, to operate through, especially when things that are being done can't really be done directly by governments for obvious reasons, political reasons. And
one of the things that Penny Mordaunt has been doing since she took the job a few months ago, is to try to clean up the image. The policy hasn't changed, the activities haven't changed, but she wants to clean up the image. So the Department for International Development, which previously had been quite willing to admit that it had been operating within Syria, for example, is now focused much more on humanitarian, solving people's hunger problems and this kind of stuff, and making sure people are healthy. And the DFID is focusing more on, in terms of publicity, I'm talking about more on Africa, whereas the activities continue more under the radar, the activities that always continued under the radar. So this is all about PR, all about getting the collaboration going, a standard policy perspective, PR agenda running, and it's pretty despicable stuff. So this is part of an information war that's going on, Patrick, which brings us nicely into this one, because this is from the Times. General Sir Gordon Messenger, military must wake up to the information war. And the Times says the need to win the information war concerns General Sir Gordon Messenger more than the latest model of tank, fast jet or warship. Hardware still has a role, but the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff wants to see an evolution in the military mindset about the importance of using data to help defeat and destroy an enemy. And he said, we have to wake up to the idea that our ability to turn data into information advantage, our ability to respond faster through cleverer decision-making, which is enabled by the flow of information, is actually, frankly, as important, if not even more important, than whether our tanks outrange an anti-tank missile. So that's a pretty impressive position to be taking, Patrick.
Sure, and I think people should be aware. You see the tough photograph here, posing for the photo, looking tough, sleeves rolled up in the middle of winter. Definitely somebody to be reckoned with. But what you should point out, Mike, is any technologies that are developed for the theater of war, for forward operations, offensive purposes, eventually, Mike, this technology comes back home and is then used on domestic populations. So when we're talking about the military being involved in information warfare, in these theaters of battle, they will be incubating and developing things that will eventually be used by the state at home. And I think we're living in that reality.
We're living in that, yeah, absolutely.
Today.
This is the post-truth reality that we're living in. Well, I'm glad to see that Peter Hitchens has woken up to the post-truth reality that we're living in. This was his article from the weekend. Peter Hitchens, Britain's frozen by our terror of ambulance-chasing lawyers. Now, Peter Hitchens, when he writes his pieces in the Mail, generally has a main sort of point that he wants to make, but then he has sub-points following on from that. So the second sub-point in his article was this, and I just want to read it because it is the most fantastic comment that I've seen him make in recent weeks and months. I asked the BBC how they could justify using propaganda footage, allegedly from the Syrian town of Ghouta, on a major news bulletin without any indication that it came from a partial source. They admitted that they had done this. They admitted that it was against the rules, but I did not get the impression that they were all that bothered, and I would not be surprised to see such stuff again. The BBC reports an awful lot of things from Syria, which it has no way of checking, from supposed gas attacks by the Assad state to death tolls and films, generally of wounded children being rushed about the place by unarmed young men. It has completely abandoned any semblance of independence or impartiality. How then can it justify its licence fee collected on these conditions? I think that is the most straightforward comment I've seen him make on the issue of propaganda in the media and the information war. And I'm quite surprised, pleasantly surprised that he's taking this position.
So what is he doing here, Mike? He's calling BS. He's calling BS on the white helmets. He's calling BS on the East Ghouta narrative that's being wrung out in the mainstream media on every major network and all the major newspapers, all singing the exact same song, like a choir. And so it's the same repeat of Aleppo. We're seeing again in East Ghouta, the same narrative. The public are getting tired of it. Those who are cognizant of the sort of propaganda that's being directed at them. And so Peter Hitchens rightly has spoken up. You might not agree. Not everyone will agree with every statement Peter Hitchens makes, and he's very controversial often. But in this case, Peter Hitchens is absolutely on the money, Mike.
Yes. Now, last week we were talking about the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and the fact that they are going to try to shore up the mainstream media. And we were talking about it again last night on the Sunday Wire programme, Patrick. Well, one of the points that Matt Hancock was making was the fact that the mainstream media is suffering from economically and commercially. Well, one of the outcomes of this suffering has been that Trinity Mirror has taken over Express newspapers. They've merged. There's going to be there are already announced some major shake-ups in staff, and undoubtedly there'll be some redundancies over this. They are going to rebrand as Reach. So this is a good piece of news. They are going to rebrand as Reach after Express newspapers take over, as it reports a fall in revenue and profits for 2017. So apparently £90 million fall in the group revenue to £632 million last year. Now these are still staggering amounts of money, Patrick, and what we could do with that kind of money would put them to shame, I think. Profit before tax also fell by 11 million to £122.5 million. Nonetheless, they claim that they are struggling financially, and so this merger has taken place. It's going to be interesting, Pat, to see what happens, because Trinity Mirror, of course, tends to be quite Europhile in its approach. The Express, Europhobic in its approach. And I'm going to be very interested to see whether the Express finds itself shifting its editorial policy over the next several months.
That's a good point, Mike. So you have definitely a collision there in agendas. Are they going to keep the titles that are existing
so
now?
far, they've said they're going to keep the titles that are existing now, yes.
I can't imagine why the revenue would have been falling all these years, Mike. Does it have anything to do with the amount of fake news that's coming out of the Express and the Mirror on a daily and weekly and almost daily basis? Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, this is a good question, and it's a question that Demos wants to answer because they have produced this new report called Mediating Populism, and it seems like another day, another report which tries to get to the bottom of why the mainstream media is failing to control the narrative. So let's see what they say. The internet's increasing function as a source of political news means that traditional media now operate in a much more convoluted and contested environment. Citizens are overwhelmed with information from a wide variety of sources, much of it lacking ratified credibility or even actively promoting misinformation. At the same time, media organisations must navigate the rise of populist leaders and their divisive or potentially dangerous views. And the first question that came to my mind as I read this, dangerous to whom? Who exactly are the views of Donald Trump dangerous to, Patrick?
And this is an interesting term. Look at this. Ratified credibility, Mike.
Yes.
This reminds me a lot of a term that we coined years ago called consensus reality. So I think this is basically the same thing as consensus reality. Ratified credibility. So somebody needs to ratify the credibility of these sources, these other sources,
well,
like the UK column, for instance. So we're not ratified. Our credibility has not been ratified. Who ratifies the credibility? This is the question. Is it Demos? Is it the liberal intelligentsia? Is it the mainstream media? Is it the Guardian Hampstead set? Is it the government? Is it Leveson? Who determines who is credible?
Well, that is exactly the point, and that is one of the points that Matt Hancock was making in his speech last week, because the government wants to make sure that it's only credible sources of information that are promoted, and that's part of what their agenda is, to support the mainstream media.
In other words, it only promote information that we like. It really has nothing to do with ratified credibility.
Absolutely.
It's information that the state likes or the information the state doesn't like.
Okay, so they say, this is Demos again, say that this paper seeks to peer behind the curtain of the British media to better understand how the growth of the new media is transforming news practices and how the rise of populism is reshaping the power dynamics between politicians and media institutions, and the democratic implications of these developments. In particular, we explore the role that traditional media organisations have played in the legitimisation and discreditation of populist parties, and the impact of these institutional decisions in the formation of public opinion towards them. So it's an interesting paper. I recommend people read it. But again, if you read through that again, they are particularly concerned about the democratic implications of these developments. What do they mean by that, Patrick?
Well, I think they're concerned, they're scared of populism, full stop.
Yes.
That seems to be the number one concern. But the populism that they claim to be referring to, Mike, is far-right populism. So this is clearly directed at Brexit, the Brexit electorate. But the reality, Mike, is that populism doesn't just take a far-right form. There is centrist populist movements, like we'll talk about in a few minutes, in Italy. Okay, so using this term populism and loading it with far-right, with a far-right characterization is really twisted on the part of Demos. So they're literally trying to herd us into this I don't know, a sort of a status quo framework where anything outside of the accepted two-party hegemony is should be categorically rejected as a threat to democracy. That's kind of what I'm reading from this.
Okay, so let's look at some of the statistics that they presented. One of the things they asked people was, which, if any, of the following publications have you read in the last week? So they're trying to get a handle on how popular the mainstream media is. So clearly, way out in front, we have the Daily Mail, with just short of 20% of the people polled reading the Daily Mail. Or is it? We'll come on to that in a second. Then we've got the Sun, the Metro, the Guardian, all on around about 12% there. And then the Daily Mirror, the Times, the Telegraph, the Express, and then we start heading down towards the Daily Star and City AM with relatively low numbers. But what struck me straight away about this graph, Patrick, was there was no bar on the graph for people that don't read any of this trash, right? So when you read through the body of the text, you actually do get an idea of how many people aren't on this graph. But not a total figure. You get it broken down into male and female. They say that 51% of women don't read any of that, and 39% of men don't read any of that. But they didn't put that figure on the graph because a visual would have given you a much better impression of what the true situation was.
That's about an average of 46% weighing on the side of females over males in terms of total population. So roughly 46% of the population don't read any of the loo roll on the newsstands. So that's interesting. Why is that not in that graph, Mike? Because that would make it a better visual representation, wouldn't it? It would be more accurate to include that next to the Daily Mail and the others, don't you think?
Well, for example, exactly. So the Daily Mail figure was 20%. Is that 20% of the 100%, or is that 20% of the 60% or the 50% that actually read the newspapers?
It's sort of misleading.
It is absolutely misleading. And then there was this one. Thinking back to the EU referendum coverage for each of the following, would you say the coverage was? And the colours there, the blues are generally positive. That's that people considered that the coverage was completely fair and impartial, or mostly fair and impartial. And then we have grey, which is about as fair and impartial as other sources. And then we have the purples, which are not partial at all. So and then we've got the hatched area, which shows the number of respondents who didn't actually read any of or listen to these classes. And from the left, we've got TV news, and then we've got radio news, and then we've got broadsheet, so-called high-quality newspapers, and then we've got the tabloid newspapers, and the red tops, local newspapers, and then what they're describing as other news sources. And what we see is that right across the mainstream media, actually the numbers of people that considered that the EU referendum coverage was either fair and impartial or mostly fair and impartial is pretty low. Mm-hmm. They generally thought the mainstream media had done a bad job. The grey area, which is about as fair and impartial and impartial as everybody else, the question in my mind is, should that be viewed positively or negatively? Because to me, what that's tantamount to saying is the coverage from this class of media outlet was just as bad as everybody else. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm looking at this negatively, but I see that as a negative response. If somebody has responded that they didn't view that television news was any better than any other type of news outlet.
That would be negative against the television news.
Yes. Yeah. And if you take that into account, then the picture for the mainstream media looks even worse.
Well, I'll take that a step further, Mike. I'd love to see the methodology on this poll. In other words, who were they polling? What sort of people? If it was reflective of the type of people that work at Demos, then that's a really small sort of percentage of the political spectrum there. Is it regional? Is it London? Is it London intelligentsia, middle class, Hoxton, Mile End? I don't know, Islington. What exactly are we looking at there? That's kind of important to me to see how big the sample and how diverse the sample was on that. So I'm guessing it's possibly a London poll. I'm not sure, but it'll be interesting to see the methodology.
Nonetheless, another paper trying to get to the bottom of why the mainstream media can't carry the narrative at the moment. When we look at this as a whole, when we look at the intervention from the Department for Digital Media, Culture and Sport, we look at the continuous, almost daily publication of articles and research papers and think tank interventions, all asking the same question. We definitely get a picture of desperation.
Yeah, and I'll save you guys, well, we can save you millions of dollars in commissioning all these useless studies. I would be the biggest fan of any of these papers or media outlets if they're actually doing any real investigative journalism over the last God knows how long. I could say start at the Iraq War and let's move forward.
Yeah.
How many people have been fired in government? How many governments have been brought down by the media? Almost nothing. What sort of scandals besides MPs' expenses? We're talking about big things. What about the UK's involvement in a legal war of aggression in Yemen? Nobody's been taken to task for that. The support of extremists in Syria via the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and so on and so forth. There's so many of these stories. It's open wounds for real journalism, but in this environment, nothing. So this is why their numbers are falling. They're not effective as a fourth estate. They're no longer the watchdog. They are the absolute lapdog of the state. The same in the United States. It's become an institutional problem in the West. So this is why their numbers are falling, because there's nothing there that's interesting in terms of watching from a news consumer's point of view.
Right. Well, that brings up an interesting point. Just to finish this little section off, we were talking on the Sunday Wire a little bit about this last night, and I made the point that how the relationship between the media and politicians has changed since the Leveson inquiry in 2011. And they're making this point as well. The new media landscape is also shifting the relationship between the UK press and politicians. While news organisations still retain significant agenda-setting power, politicians are increasingly looking to more direct forms of communication with voters. And what they're almost saying is it's almost an apology that because politicians have access to Twitter and have allegedly direct communication with voters, that the mainstream media is then forced to simply regurgitate what politicians are saying in some desperate attempt to maintain relevance.
Yeah, and not only that, to maintain their sources within government, their special privileged access to the halls of power. This is the same problem we see in many places. That's definitely how Washington works, and I'm sure to a degree that's how London works as well. But let's just before we move on, Mike, take the Chilcot inquiry, for instance. There's evidence, absolutely gaping evidence there that's been revealed by people like Piers Robinson, Professor Piers Robinson from Sheffield University, that Tony Blair, the government, colluded with the United States in advance. There was a predetermined agenda to wage an illegal war of aggression. It's absolutely proven. What did the media do, Mike, in light of any of this information? They hardly followed up on it. Is there any calls for prosecution of Tony Blair? Nothing. So it's a very comfortable environment and a little bit too intimate between the mainstream press and the state. And therefore, nothing happens. And this is why people are turning off of the mainstream media, because they just don't believe in it anymore. So it's kind of simple. Okay,
a few ads here. May is going to be a pretty busy month. It begins on the 4th to the 7th of May with Alternative View Conference, AV9, in the Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Details can be found on alternativeview.co.uk. You'll be speaking. A whole range of speakers. Brian will be speaking at that as well. Do get along to it if you possibly can. The following weekend then, in Nottingham on the 12th of May in the Albert Hall, the UK Column is holding a day's conference entitled Dying for Good Health. Can't give you any more information on that just at the moment. Hopefully within the next couple of days we will have the details of speakers and so on for that. Please get along to that if you possibly can as well. And then on the 27th of May, which is a Sunday, the next Media on Trial event is taking place in Leeds. Details are on mediaontrial.uk. And this time they are aiming to ask the question, is the mainstream media in breach of the Terrorism Act in the UK for their promotion of terrorist narratives and for the fact that they are often embedded with terrorists in the Middle East whenever they go to report there.
Yeah.
So
and terrorists are their sources for their exclusive stories and so forth, and they're promoting a terrorist-based narrative. So that will be definitely something interesting to explore.
Now, you mentioned Italy, Patrick. Here we go. This is the Wall Street Journal saying Italy faces political paralysis after populist jolt, and we have the map on the right showing the vote and the outcome.
So, big shocker and tremors in Brussels this morning as the poll results came in. The Five Star Movement, which was founded by Pepe Grillo years ago in Italy, he's a comedian and a blogger. The Five Star Movement captured the most amount of votes this time around. And another party which was surging is the Northern League, or Lega Nord in Italian. And so we have a situation now in Italy which is a hung parliament, but this basically both the leading insurgent parties are anti-EU parties. So Five Star is not great in terms of the European Union, and the Northern League will be more a right-wing party, very anti-EU. So a lot of worries about how this is going to look going forward. The markets are reacting negatively, and what will this mean for the euro? Will there be a referendum called in the future in Italy if either of these two parties manage to put a coalition together in the next few months? So there's going to be a lot of wrangling over the next couple of months in Italy as both these two key parties, these two anti-EU, let's say, insurgent parties, tussle to try to put a coalition together. Currently, you've got the Democratic Party in power, so that any coalition's going to have to include them. So my guess is that the Five Star Movement there's a chance that they could form a coalition with the Democratic Party right now, giving a pretty good majority in the Italian parliament, but still there's going to be a lot of problems. So right now the Italian political system is in limbo. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. So will there be a DUP sort of deal done if they can find a dodgy party and pay them off with $1 billion or something like that, like Theresa managed to do? Will that happen? What sort of coalition is going to be? Germany's actually sorted out their coalition issue. So Angela Merkel has.
She's actually going to form a government then.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen based on what we saw this morning in the news. So maybe you can talk about that on tomorrow's program. But yeah, the other thing about this is the center left in Italy is hemorrhaging support. So that was a mainstay for political power in Italy for the last few years. But as we know, the Italian democratic system is absolutely, I don't understand half of what's going on. It's very complex, and so are the demographics in terms of where the power is.
So who's responsible for this?
Well, of course, you can't have an upheaval like this, a populist upheaval in Italy. You can't have anything like this happen. Here's Silvio Berlusconi showing his ballot, but the Russians had to be involved, hadn't they? And there you go. If you look in the background, over the shoulder of the bodyguard of Silvio Berlusconi, you'll see there he is, Vladimir Putin.
He gets around.
He does, and he's looking on, making sure that everything's going to plan. And so, yes, there's apparently Russian meddling in the Italian elections. So that's an exclusive.
An exclusive?
Yeah, well, that photo was leaked to us by one of our sources.
It's only a matter of time, I think, before that does appear in the mainstream press. So we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, I just wanted to have a laugh at The Guardian here because the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport has released a report today on doping in sport. The Guardian chose to focus mainly on the section of that report which mentioned Russia. Sebastian Coe, Lord Coe, who of course is head of the international sporting regulator, is accused of misleading the inquiry into Russian doping. Of course, the inquiry wasn't just into Russian doping; it was into doping in sport in general, he appeared before the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee in December 2015. He said he had not been aware of any specific allegations about corruption of anti-doping systems in Russia until he watched the documentary, which had appeared on German television in December 2014. They said in their report he sought to distance himself from any knowledge of the allegations of doping in Russian athletics before the details were exposed in the German documentary. His answers to us about this were misleading. Lord Coe may not have read the email and attachments sent to him, but it stretches credibility to believe that he was not aware, at least in general terms, of the main allegations that the Ethics Commission had been seeking to investigate. But, you know, this focus on Russia, when at the same time we've got focus on track and field sports in the UK and also in cycling in the UK and doping allegations around those, it seems to be completely disingenuous on the part of The Guardian to focus. I mean, half their article was about the other stuff, but the headline focused on that. Because we've got to keep the boot in on Russia at every opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at this story pretty closely over the last couple of years. I've commented on it as well on television. And to me, in my personal opinion, looking at it, the McLaren report and the whole case against Russia for doping is a big, giant fraud. And what it is, it's being used to demonize Russia in the international arena, in the international court of public opinion. And this is not a real court. This is a kangaroo court. And sitting at the top of this kangaroo court, running point, are the United States and the UK. So anything to demonize Russia, to frustrate Russia, to marginalize their public image in order to use that to sort of leverage a little more advantage in the sort of geopolitical arena. So they're using sport as an arena to do geopolitical battle between the West and Russia. So that's my personal opinion, having looked at the doping case.
I agree with that. Now, I suppose we have to congratulate, to a certain degree, the Oscars, because they didn't award the Oscar for Best Documentary to Last Men in Aleppo.
It's surprising. So Best Documentary, for the second straight year, you had a White Helmets film being nominated at the Oscars. It's incredible. And so we've dubbed this unofficially the Leni Riefenstahl Award for Best Propaganda Filmmaker. And so the White Helmets didn't get it. The Last Men in Aleppo is one of the most incredible pieces of propaganda that you'll ever see. If you can manage to sit through this film without sort of switching it off, because it is that bad. But in terms of the amount of press and stuff that it's got, it's unprecedented, Mike. So this is also part of the information warfare.
I mean, by any standard, Patrick, and the quality of filmmaking and so on, it shouldn't even have had a nomination.
No.
Somebody else deserved to have that nomination.
Absolutely. So, but hey, if you want to get nominated for an Oscar in documentary films, there's a good chance if you can make a White Helmet film, you'll probably at least make it into the finals.
Yes.
So bear that in mind, any budding filmmakers out there.
Okay, you wanted to highlight this tweet. We mentioned it last night on the Sunday Wire again. What give us the background?
So this is supposedly coming out of East Ghouta here, and this is a plea, I think, Project Civilians, Syria, UK. So this is another one of these opposition activist groups, the Free Syrian Army in Exile. So they need Parliament to affirm that the UK government has a mandate to uphold Resolution 2139, subsequent resolutions, to enforce the declared will of the UN Security Council on Syria. What is the declared will of the UN Security Council? Is it military intervention? So you're seeing all this responsibility to protect stuff. Look at this picture. They've wrapped these two children in UN Refugee Council tarps, which, if you go to Syria, these tarps are everywhere. They're used for, roadside market stand roofs, and people put them on cars. They're absolutely everywhere because the UN's provided millions of these tarps over the last 7 years for all sorts of things. But this is propaganda writ large. Look at this.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible, and the big streak of blood along the side there, and so on. That is a pretty horrible picture.
And so, taking Peter Hitchens' point, Mike, where are these girls? Are they injured? Are they dead? Are they alive? Do we know? Do we have any of that information? But this is good enough to run with. In this environment right now, this hyper propagandistic environment, anything is good to run with so long that it fulfills the narrative of the establishment. Then it's good to go. Doesn't need to be vetted. It's good enough. Tells the right story.
Now, let's head over to the United States. And Mr. Mueller, has he dropped Russiagate?
It seems so. It seems so. They managed to indict 13 Russian trolls who will never see the inside of a courtroom in the United States a couple of weeks ago. And so now it seems like Mueller's dropped Russia, and they're on to sort of Arabgate now. So that seems to be all done after almost 2 years, well, say 18 months, of Russian investigations, of Russian meddling, Russian hacking, Russian influence, Russian collusion, etc., etc. No evidence, nothing found. They managed to get a few plea bargains of people admitting that they lied to the FBI, and they're sort of chasing Paul Manafort for some financial improprieties, but yet no evidence. So all of that, Mike, for a year and a half, every single major media outlet, Russia, 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 fake news for 18 months.
So now what is this broader investigation?
Well, this is looking into sort of connections between persons in Washington and money being laundered with the United Arab Emirates. So this is really a Gulf-based inquiry here. So it's we'll see where it goes. I would be surprised if it went very far, Mike, because there's a lot of Gulf money in Washington right now.
Yeah.
So that money buys a lot in terms of protection. So we'll see.
Okay, just a couple of minutes left, Patrick, but let's go back to this. This is from The Federalist, and the question is, why did it take 2 weeks to discover Parkland students astroturfing?
This is a great article here. So, so full disclosure, The Federalist is regarded as a sort of conservative publication. So anyway, they're pointing out here what a lot of people, they're pointing out that this is ostensibly a right wing, not in the far right sense, but a right wing publication criticizing other conservatives for approaching this Florida shooting issue in the wrong way. In other words, they're all going off on a tangent. They want to ban our guns and also crisis actors and so forth. And he's saying that the average conservative pundit and voter missed the real lesson here is that the Democratic Party, MoveOn.org, which is a George Soros-funded organization, and others mobilized this campaign, had everything in place and ready, incredible organization, banks of people making phone calls, getting people to show up to these rallies, to these events, because they still needed the crowd. They needed to move the crowds, organize the coaches, organize the buses. Okay, that is a political machine. That's what they're talking about.
So are they suggesting that this political machine was just waiting for the next event?
That's what they're saying. That this political machine was gassed up and ready to go, and then they use these children to basically astroturf on this issue. This is not a natural grassroots issue. They created a grassroots movement in the space of 48 hours, essentially. But the machine was ready to go. Now, whether this was ready to go for this specific event in advance, they're not saying that, and we're not able to say that. But certainly it does seem like it is, Mike, and it's almost incredible how fast that machine got into motion. But what they're pointing out here is that machine already existed. It's already there. And then so how well the left works in terms of organizing in this way, the left have mastered the art of astroturfing, whereas the right tend to be a little more, let's say, casual about some of these sort of things. And they don't activate in the same way that the American left does. So it's a very good article. I encourage people to read it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're just about out of time now. I'm kind of guessing because we started so late. But thank you very much for joining us today. I do apologize again for the technical problems at the beginning of the program. Thank you for joining us, Patrick. We will be back at the same time as usual, 1 p.m. tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.